They say Seoul has no room for the poor, that the city's lights are only for those who can afford to stand in them. Mina had heard that. She believed it. Until the night something fell out of the hands of the most powerful man in Korea and landed at her feet. She was 21. She had no savings, no connections, no plan beyond surviving the next morning. And what she found on that pavement could have changed all of that in an instant. The easy way, the invisible way. No one would have known. But Mina's father raised her on a fishing dock, not a lie. So she picked it up, and she walked it back. She had no idea that honesty, in the wrong hands of the wrong powerful men, is the most dangerous thing a girl like her could carry. Sometimes courage doesn't look like strength. Sometimes it looks like a girl in torn sneakers walking toward the one door she was never meant to open. Stay with me, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that doing the right thing always finds its way back to you. Because this story is proof. She had nothing, no family in this city, no address anyone would write down, no one who would file a report if she simply ceased to exist. That evening she was walking the glittering boulevard of Gangnam, not because she belonged there, but because the other streets had already turned her away. She was looking for work, any work, and the kind of work people offer when they feel generous and withdraw when they remember who they are. And then she saw it, a flash drive, small, black, matte, lying on the polished pavement outside the most feared building in Seoul, like something the city had coughed up and didn't want back. When she turned it over, her breath stopped. 3 silver initials engraved on the side, KJH Kwon Jae-han. The man the government feared to audit, the man whose name people didn't say loudly in public. And the man who owned more of this city than the city knew. In her hand was something that belonged to him. She could have slipped it into her pocket and walked away. No one saw her pick it up. No camera was pointed at her. For one long moment, the street girl and the most dangerous secret in Korea stood face to face. But she turned around, and she walked straight toward his building. She had no idea that this one choice, made on an empty stomach, yet with torn sneakers and nothing to lose, would drag her into a war between power and truth that had been burning for a decade, that it would cost people their freedom, that it would cost her her safety, and that it would uncover a secret about her own past she was never supposed to find. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a poor girl can do is be honest in a world built on lies. Stay with me, because what happens next is not what anyone expected. And if you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere, this story is for you. Like, subscribe, and don't go anywhere, because this is only the beginning. The city lights were just beginning to glow the evening it happened. Mina had been in Seoul for exactly 3 months, and in that time she had learned one thing about this city. It was generous to those who already had everything and invisible to everyone else. She had arrived from Tongyong, a small coastal town where her father had once mended fishing nets on a dock that smelled of salt and early mornings. The nets were gone now. The dock was gone. Her father was gone. And the debt that swallowed everything had eventually swallowed her, too, until the only direction left was north. Seoul, the city that glittered from a distance and cut up close. She worked odd jobs. She asked no favors. And she slept in a room so small she could touch both walls lying down. That Thursday evening she was doing what she always did at sunset, walking the boulevard outside Kwon Empire Group's headquarters, not because she planned to, but because the building's warmth spilled out onto the pavement and the cold had already found the bones of her jacket. That was when the convoy arrived. They did not take her to reception. 2 men appeared from the entrance before she had finished speaking to the guard. No explanation, no questions. One of them held the door open with the flat courtesy of someone who had practiced making force look polite. Mina walked inside because the alternative was not really an alternative. The corridor swallowed her whole. She was taken down 2 floors by a service elevator she hadn't known existed. and then through a hallway that grew quieter with every turn until the city outside completely disappeared. When the door finally opened, what waited for her was a small rectangular room with a single steel table, 2 chairs, and a fluorescent light that buzzed just below the frequency of comfort. No windows. One camera mounted in the upper corner, its red eye steady and unblinking. She sat down slowly. The men left without a word. The door closed. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. The fluorescent light hummed. Mina placed her hands flat on the table and breathed steadily. She had not come here to be afraid. She had come here to return something that wasn't hers. She kept reminding herself of that. She kept her hands flat. Then the door opened. She felt it before she saw it. The way the air in the room rearranged itself, the way the temperature seemed to drop by 2 degrees. Kwon Jae-han walked in, and the room became immediately smaller. And he was taller than he had looked from across the boulevard. His suit was dark and precisely fitted. His jaw was set. His eyes were the kind of dark that gave nothing back. He did not look at the room when he entered. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a variable they are calculating. He sat across from her without speaking. When he finally did, his voice was low and even. "You picked it up." "It fell," Mina said. "I returned it. That's all." He studied her face for a moment, and then he held out his hand. She set the drive on his palm without hesitation. She had been gripping it so long her fingers ached when she released it. He turned it over slowly, pressed something on the side, produced a slim device from his jacket and connected it. His eyes moved across whatever appeared on the small screen. A muscle in his jaw tightened once, briefly, then was still. "Did you look at it?" "I don't own a laptop," Mina said quietly. The room went completely still. Then the door opened again, and a different kind of cold entered with it. The man who stepped in was perhaps 40, immaculately dressed, silver cufflinks, hair combed with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was its own form of power. He smiled as he crossed the room, a practiced, pleasant expression that lived entirely on the surface of his face and went no deeper. Director Seok Junho. She didn't know his name yet. She only knew, as immediately and without reason she could name, that she did not trust him. "Sir," his voice was smooth as lacquered wood. "We cannot simply release her. She handled the drive. She could have copied—" "She returned it," Jae-han said flatly. Seok's smile stayed in place. His eyes moved to Mina and stayed there 1 beat too long. "Of course," he said pleasantly. Jae-han looked at her again. "You need work?" Mina blinked. "Yes." "Building services, 7 a.m. Tomorrow." She was escorted out before she could respond. Back through the quiet corridor, up the service elevator, out through the lobby and into the night. The boulevard opened around her, wide and blazing with city light. She stood on the pavement and breathed. For the first time in 3 months, something in her chest felt different, dangerous and fragile at once. Hope. She didn't see Director Seok step into the corridor behind her, phone already at his ear, nor his pleasant expression finally gone. "She's coming tomorrow," he said quietly. "Handle it carefully." She arrived at 6:43 a.m. The lobby looked different this early. The marble floors were still being mopped by a man who didn't look up when she entered. The reception desk was unmanned. The grand lighting that made the building glow like something untouchable at night was replaced in the service hours by flat, functional brightness that showed every scratch on every surface. Mina noticed all of it. This was the building without its costume on. A junior staff member checked her name against a list and handed her a gray uniform without making eye contact. She was pointed toward the basement level. No welcome, no orientation, just a direction. The building services floor smelled of bleach and rubber and something faintly metallic. The ceiling was lower here. The lights did not hum pleasantly. They simply existed. A row of cleaning carts lined one wall. A whiteboard covered in assignments covered another. Team leader Choi Ara was already there. She was perhaps 30, precise in her movements, with the kind of efficiency that had long ago crossed into coldness. She looked at Mina the way someone looks at a stain they've been asked to explain. "You're the one Mr. Kwon placed directly," she said. Not a question, a categorization. "Yes," Mina answered. Choi Ara handed her a printed schedule without another word. 5th floor executive corridor. And supply room restocking on 3. Document runs between 7 departments. The assignments were not unreasonable. The tone in which they were given was designed to remind her that reasonable was a privilege. Mina took the schedule and got to work. The 5th floor was different from the basement in the way that altitude changes everything in this building. The carpet began on the 3rd floor. The noise stopped somewhere around the 4th. By the 5th, but the silence had weight, the kind that came not from emptiness, but from people being very careful about what they said and where. She mopped around closed doors behind which quiet, serious conversations moved like water under ice. The higher the floor, she was beginning to understand, the more dangerous the quiet. In the break room at noon, 2 junior staff members sat across from her without acknowledging she was present. Then one of them said something in a lilting Seoul accent about country girls who clean their way into buildings they don't understand. The other laughed. Mina ate her rice and said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was not weakness. Sometimes it was the only dignified response to small people. She was restocking a supply cabinet on the 7th floor when she heard the aides before she saw them, that particular shuffling urgency of people orbiting power. And she stepped back against the wall instinctively. Kwon Jae-han moved through the corridor with 4 people around him, all speaking at once. He was already looking at a document in his hand. Then, for reasons she couldn't explain, he glanced up. Their eyes met for less than 2 seconds. He looked away first and kept walking, unhurried, as though it hadn't happened. She didn't know what it meant. She returned to the supply cabinet, and by evening her lower back ached and her hands were dry from the cleaning chemicals. Her shared room was loud with 3 other women cooking and talking over each other. She lay on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling while their conversation drifted around her. "Kwon Empire? My cousin's friend worked there. Asked too many questions about the accounts. Gone within a month, and 2 others before him. Just gone." Mina closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed on the mattress beside her. Unknown number. But one message. "You should not have gone back there. Leave before you understand why." She stared at it for a long time. The room noise continued around her, indifferent. Then she set the phone face down on the mattress. She would not run. 3 days in, and Mina had learned the building's rhythms the way you learn a person's moods, quietly, carefully, through observation rather than conversation. She knew which corridors were busy at 9 and empty by 10. She knew the 4th floor smelled of printer ink and anxiety. She knew the service elevator stuck briefly between 2 and 3 if you didn't hold the button long enough. What she didn't know was the 9th floor. Until Tuesday morning, when Choi Ara handed her a revised assignment without explanation. Executive Archive Corridor, 9th floor, full clean before the 10 o'clock briefings. Mina took the cart and went. The 9th floor was different. The carpet was thicker. The air was cooler. Almost clinical. There were fewer doors, and the ones that existed were heavier, the kind that absorbed sound rather than blocking it. She worked methodically, moving the cart down the corridor in steady strokes. Halfway down, she noticed one door sitting slightly open. Maybe 3 centimeters. Enough. 2 voices moved inside, low and pressured, the cadence of men who needed to finish a conversation before someone arrived. She kept mopping, She did not slow down. The drive is back. That's a problem. Then we accelerate. If he finds the Suri files before we... The mop handle caught the wall with a hollow knock. Silence collapsed inside the room like something falling. Mina kept moving, steady pace, eyes forward. The door did not open. She turned the corner at the end of the corridor and stopped, her back against the wall, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Suri. Her family name. An uncommon name, actually. She had always known this, and had been teased for it as a child in the small coastal town where everyone else seemed to share 4 surnames between them. It was not a name you heard by accident in a sentence about files and acceleration and problems. She told herself it meant nothing. Companies had thousands of records. It could be anyone. But her hands had begun to shake around the mop handle, and she could not make them stop. "You're far from your usual floor," she turned. Director Seok Junho stood 3 meters behind her. She had not heard him approach. She did not know how long he had been there. His expression was pleasant, unhurried, a man simply making conversation. "I was assigned here this morning," Mina said. "Choi-ara's schedule." "Of course." He looked at her cart slowly, his eyes moving across the supplies with the deliberate attention of someone making a point rather than conducting an inspection. He lifted the corner of a folded cloth, set it back down. "Careful," he said, smiling. "Some floors aren't safe for new staff." He walked away. She didn't watch him go. That evening she found a PC cafe 3 streets from her shared room and paid for 30 minutes. She typed carefully, "Kwon Empire Group, Suri, fraud." Almost nothing came back. A news archive with a broken link. A forum thread that had been deleted, surviving only as a screenshot shared by an anonymous account 3 years ago. She leaned toward the screen. Suri whistleblower case. The 2014 accountant attempted to report subsidiary fraud, disappeared from records after the screenshot cut off. The source link was dead. The year the fishing license was revoked. The year the debt arrived without explanation. The year her father stopped sleeping. The year everything fell apart. Mina sat back slowly, her father's face surfacing in her memory with a clarity that hurt. Outside the cafe window, a black car idled across the street. She hadn't noticed it when she arrived. She didn't know how long it had been there. It didn't move. If you think Mina should keep digging, stay with me, because what she finds next will change everything she thought she knew about her family. Like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. She knew something was wrong before anyone spoke to her. It was in the way the basement floor went quiet when she pushed through the service entrance, and the way 2 colleagues who had nodded at her yesterday suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. Even the junior staff member who usually complained loudly about the coffee machine was silent, head down, absorbed in nothing. Mina changed into her uniform slowly. She felt the room without looking at it. Choi-ara appeared in the doorway at 7:22 a.m. "Supervisor's office now." Not a summons, a verdict. The office was small and smelled of old paper. The supervisor, a heavyset man named Mr. And Tae, who had never once addressed Mina directly, sat behind his desk with the careful expression of someone who had been told what to think before she arrived. A security officer stood against the far wall in full uniform, arms folded. Mina sat down. Her hands were steady. She made them stay that way. "There was a security incident yesterday," Mr. Tae began, reading from a printed sheet rather than looking at her. "Proprietary client data was accessed and copied from a restricted terminal on the 9th floor. Building logs show your staff ID was used to enter the floor at the time of the breach." "I was on the 9th floor," Mina said carefully. "I was assigned to clean the executive archive corridor. Your ID was logged at the terminal at 1443. I never touched a terminal. I was mopping." Mr. Tae said nothing. He set the paper down and looked at her for the first time with the specific blankness of a man who has already made his decision. The door opened. Director Seok Junho entered the way he always entered rooms, pleasantly, as though he happened to be passing and simply wanted to help. His suit today was charcoal gray. His expression arranged itself into something that resembled concern. "Miss Mina." He said her name gently, the way a person says the name of someone they are about to disappoint. "This is very serious. Accessing restricted client files is a criminal matter. The company may need to involve outside authorities." "I didn't access any files." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "My ID was cloned or borrowed by someone else. I only cleaned. That is all I have ever done on that floor." She looked directly at Seok when she said it. His expression did not change. That pleasant, practiced concern held its shape perfectly. No one in the room looked convinced. She was escorted out of the building at 8:15 a.m., suspended pending investigation. Her access card taken at the door. The security officer walked her to the entrance with the detached professionalism of someone returning a library book. The boulevard received her in silence. She sat on the nearest bench and did not move for a long time. This was the same pavement, the same wide street where the convoy had swept past her weeks ago, where the drive had caught the last of the evening light and she had picked it up and decided, without fully understanding why, to be honest. She stared at the ground between her feet. A warmth appeared at her elbow, a small paper cup, steam rising from it. She looked up. An elderly woman stood beside the bench, a charcoal brazier of roasted chestnuts on a cart behind her. The woman's face was deeply lined and entirely kind. She hadn't asked anything, she simply offered the cup. Mina took it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then the old woman, Mama Rina, though Mina didn't know her name yet, looked up at the glass tower and said quietly, "The tall buildings in this city eat people whole." A pause. "But they can't eat someone who refuses to be swallowed." Mina wrapped both hands around the warm cup and said nothing. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. The voice on the other end was male, low, careful, and the voice of someone who had learned to speak as though walls were always listening. "I know what they're doing to you," he said, "and I know why your father's name is in that drive." Mina stopped breathing. "Meet me alone." She told Mama Rina before she told anyone else. The old woman listened without interrupting, her hand still wrapped around her chestnut brazier, her eyes steady and unremarkable. When Mina finished, she wrote an address on a torn piece of receipt paper and pressed it into Mama Rina's palm. "If I'm not back in 2 hours," Mina said quietly, "send that to the police." Mama Rina folded the paper without drama and slipped it into her coat pocket. She asked no questions. That, more than anything, steadied Mina's breathing. The Jimjilbang was on a side street in Mapo, the kind of bathhouse that had existed in that spot for 30 years without changing its sign. Public enough that nothing could happen to her quietly. She chose a seat in the outer waiting area, near the entrance, back against the wall. The man arrived 4 minutes after her. Han Gisu was mid-50s, slight, with the particular carefulness of someone who had been looking over their shoulder long enough that it had become his natural posture. His jacket was the kind that didn't draw attention. He sat across from her and did not extend his hand. "You're Sori Chanho's daughter," he said, and not a question. The name in his mouth, her father's full name, spoken by a stranger in a bathhouse in Seoul, hit her somewhere behind the sternum. "Yes," she said. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he began. In 2013, her father had been contracted as a logistics accountant for a Kwon Empire subsidiary operating along the southern coast. Routine work, regional infrastructure billing, but the numbers he was given didn't match the numbers that should have existed. He and her father, methodical, quiet, incapable of leaving a discrepancy unexamined, had followed them until he understood what they meant. Funds, significant amounts, laundered through government infrastructure contracts across 3 provinces. He gathered what he could, documented it carefully, attempted to report through the proper channels, and Director Seok Junho, then a rising junior executive in the company's internal compliance division, intercepted the report before it reached anyone with the authority to act on it. Within 4 months, the family's fishing business license was revoked. Irregularities cited, fabricated on paper, impossible to challenge without resources they no longer had. Debt arrived from angles that made no sense. Everything her father had built over 20 years dissolved in under 12 months. And the accident, Mina said. Her voice was flat and even. Han Gi-soo was quiet for a moment. I don't believe it was an accident, he said carefully. Mina sat completely still. She was not crying. She had moved somewhere past the place where tears live, into a quieter, colder territory where things simply became true whether you were ready for them or not. The drive, Han Gi-soo continued, the one carried by Kwon Jae-han. It contains the original Suri files, your father's compiled evidence. And we don't know how it survived, but it did. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He looked at her directly for the first time. Because Seok knows you've seen the name, and he will not stop until you are gone. She walked out into the Seoul night alone. She did not go back to her room. Her feet carried her without instruction, down 2 streets, across a wide intersection, until she was standing on the boulevard opposite the Kwon Empire building. The executive floors were lit against the dark sky, steady and indifferent. She stood there for a long time. Then she took out her phone, found the main company number. When the overnight operator answered, her voice was quiet and certain. I need to speak to Kwon Jae-han directly. A pause. Tell him it's about the Suri files. There were no guards at the private entrance. A single aide. Quiet, efficient. I know unnecessary eye contact, met her at a side door on the building's north face and walked her to an elevator she had never seen during her days on the cleaning roster. It opened directly onto the top floor. No lobby, no waiting area, no room designed to make her feel small. She was shown to an office at the end of a short corridor and left there. The room surprised her. She had expected the architecture of power, the kind of office that announced itself, and that made visitors aware of the distance between their life and the occupants. Instead, it was sparse. 1 desk, 2 chairs, a long window looking out over the city. No awards on the walls, no display cases, nothing performative. Kwon Jae-han was standing at the window when she entered. He turned and gestured to the chair across from the desk without ceremony. She sat, and she told him everything. Han Gi-soo, the Jimjilbang, and her father's name in a fragment of overheard conversation on the 9th floor, the forum screenshot, the broken link, the year that matched. She spoke in the same order that it had happened, without editorializing, without asking him to feel anything about it. She simply laid it down in front of him like evidence, which is what it was. He did not interrupt once. When she finished, the room was quiet. He looked at the desk surface for a moment, not avoiding her, she sensed, but thinking with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that the wrong word now would cost something. Your father, he said finally, tried to do what I have been trying to do for 3 years. He told her then, slowly, in plain language, without the kind of careful omissions powerful people usually employed when explaining themselves to those with less to lose. He had inherited Kwon Empire knowing what it was. His father had built something real, but had built it on a foundation that required corruption to remain standing. Jae-han had spent 3 years mapping that foundation, identifying the accounts, the contracts, the people, the chain of complicity, gathering evidence that could survive a courtroom rather than simply destroying the company overnight and taking thousands of innocent people down with it. The flash drive was part of that archive, one of several. Seok, he continued, has never worked for me. He works for Chairman Beck, a political figure whose name runs through the infrastructure contracts your father first identified. Seok was placed inside this company to watch me, to slow me down, to dismantle anything that gets too close. He framed you, Jae-han said, looking at her directly, because you were near the files, and because framing someone with no power is easy. The words landed without cruelty. They were simply true, and he said them like someone who understood that she already knew it. Mina looked back at him steadily. Then stop him, she said. I need proof that holds in court. What's on the drive isn't enough alone. I need Seok to act, to expose his own hand. Silence settled between them. Use me, Mina said. He looked at her then, not calculating, not pitying. Something quieter than either, something that took its time. If this goes wrong, he said, I cannot protect you. Mina held his gaze. You couldn't protect my father either, she said, but I'm still here. The boardroom was on the 11th floor. Mina had never been inside it. She had mopped the corridor outside it twice during her first week, noting the weight of the door, the quality of the silence behind it. Now she sat at the far end of the long table with 12 faces arranged around it like a jury that had already reached its verdict. Director Seok stood at the head of the room. He was immaculate. He had prepared the way a man prepares when he believes he has already won. The presentation was layered, sourced, cross-referenced, visitor logs with timestamps, access records tied to her staff, ID, a manufactured digital trail that implied coordination with an external party. He presented it all with the measured gravity of someone performing concern for the company's well-being. The breach was deliberate, he said. The access pattern indicates prior knowledge of the archive structure. This was not a cleaning staff member wandering into the wrong room. The board listened. Mina watched their faces shift. The small recalibrations that happened when powerful people began to move toward the easier conclusion. Even two men she had seen nod at Jae-han in corridors now looked uncertain, their eyes moving between Seok's presentation and her face with the uncomfortable neutrality of people preparing to be on the right side of whatever happened next. Jae-han had not spoken, and he sat at the opposite end of the table from Seok, his hands flat on the surface, his expression giving nothing. Mina had learned by now what his stillness meant. She kept her breathing even. Then he stood. One sentence. Show me the origin metadata on those files. Something moved across Seok's face, fast and then gone. If Mina hadn't been watching for exactly that, she would have missed it. The IT security head, a quiet woman named Ms. A Park who had the careful neutrality of someone who understood her job, was to report facts rather than survive politics, pulled the data on the room's display screen. The fabricated access logs had been created from a single terminal, registered to Director Seok Junho's secured private workstation. Encryption key, his alone. The room went completely silent. That terminal can be accessed remotely, Seok said. His voice had changed, the warmth still present, but something underneath it now, and something pressured. Someone could have... By whom? Jae-han said quietly. You held the only encryption key. You changed it yourself 3 weeks ago. I have the system record. For one moment, just one, the mask came down. The boardroom saw the face beneath the pleasantness. Calculating. Cornered, furious. Then security entered and Seok was escorted out with the controlled efficiency of men who had been waiting in the corridor for exactly this signal. He was not arrested. His connections ran too deep for a boardroom dismissal to be the end of it. Everyone in the room understood this, including Jae-han. Seok would make calls before midnight. evidence could still be reached. Mina's phone vibrated at 11:47 p.m., an internal security alert, forwarded from a number she recognized as Jae-han's system, Sublevel 2, unauthorized access, server room, where the original SORI files and the full evidence archive were stored. Active. Right now. She called Jae-han. One ring. I know, he said. Go. She was already moving. The service corridor swallowed her footsteps as she ran, the basement levels dropping away around her. The building at midnight was a different place. Stripped, skeletal, echoing. Sublevel 2, straight ahead. She didn't know that behind her the executive elevator was descending. She didn't know they were both running toward the same room. She didn't know Director Seok was already inside it. The door was open. Mina slowed at the threshold of Sublevel 2 and took in the room in one breath. Server racks lining 3 walls, a single terminal lit at the far end, and Director Seok Junho standing at it, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the focused urgency of a man who understood he was running out of time. A progress bar on the screen. 40% complete. He heard her and turned. She had never seen his face like this. The pleasantness was entirely gone. And what remained was raw. A man stripped of the performance he had maintained for years, suddenly visible in a way he had never intended to be. Desperate. And desperate, she remembered someone once telling her, was more dangerous than cruel. You have no idea, he said quietly, what you've cost me. He stepped away from the terminal. Toward her. Walk away. I'll make sure you're paid. Set up properly. A life. A real one. I'm better than anything you came to this city looking for. Mina stepped inside the room. My father didn't walk away, she said. She moved toward the terminal. He moved faster, one hand catching her arm, pulling her back hard. She was not a fighter. She had never pretended to be. But she was fast, and she had noticed the alarm panel on the wall beside the door the moment she entered, the way she had learned to notice everything in this building. She twisted, reached, and hit it with her open palm before he could stop her. The alarm split the silence of Sublevel 2 wide open. Seok grabbed her shoulder. She pulled free. He reached for the terminal again, 67% complete. And then the door filled with bodies. Jae-han first, moving past her without breaking stride. His security team behind him. And behind them, in the gray-blue uniforms she didn't immediately recognize. On financial crimes officers who moved with the particular efficiency of people who had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. Jae-han was already at the secondary terminal across the room. His fingers moved quickly, deliberately. The deletion sequence stuttered. Stopped. The files held. 67%, not enough. Everything survived. Seok was surrounded where he stood. He looked at the officers, then at Jae-han, then finally at Mina. His expression in that last moment was not anger. It was something quieter and more final. The look of a man watching the structure of his life come down around him. He was taken out without resistance. That same night, at a residence in Seongbuk-dong, Chairman Baek was arrested. His name ran through the recovered files like a thread, through the infrastructure contracts, through the 2013 laundering operation, through the decision to silence a coastal accountant named Suri Chanho, who had noticed something he wasn't supposed to notice. And the Suri files were formally entered into the national investigation within the week. Her father's name was cleared, officially designated a whistleblower who had been systematically destroyed to protect criminal interests. The fishing business debt, engineered from the beginning, was posthumously discharged through a government reparations mechanism tied to the case. Mina sat alone when she received the document confirming it. She read her father's name in the official language of vindication and held the paper in both hands until her breathing steadied. Jae-han addressed the company staff in the atrium on a Thursday morning. The room was full. Every floor, every department, people who had whispered about the street girl and people who had looked away when she was escorted out, and people who had simply watched, uncertain which way things would fall. He spoke briefly. He did not perform. Integrity, he said, is not what a company says in its mission statement. It is what one person chooses to do when no one is watching. He turned toward Mina, where she stood at the edge of the room. The atrium followed his eyes. Later, she stood on the upper walkway outside the 11th floor, looking down at the boulevard below. The same wide street. The same evening light moving gold across the pavement where, weeks ago, she had crouched down and picked up something that didn't belong to her and made the only decision she knew how to make. She thought about that girl, hungry, invisible, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She thought about her father on the dock in the early morning, mending nets with patient hands, telling her without looking up that a person who keeps what isn't theirs slowly loses what they are. She looked at the street below and whispered softly into the evening air. I found it, Appa. I gave it back." Behind her, a few steps away, Jae-han stood without speaking. Not as a CEO, not as Korea's most dangerous man, as someone who had watched honesty do what 3 years of strategy and power had not quite managed alone. She had come to Seoul with nothing. She left the street with everything, not because she took what wasn't hers, but because she refused to. If this story moved you, if you believe that one honest choice, made quietly in the right moment, can shake the powerful and rebuild the broken, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like, subscribe and stay with me. Because the next story begins where you least expect it.